over 30 years ago, there was a very controversial movie that came out called The Last Temptation of Christ. It was based on this book right here by Nikos Kazantzakis, which came out decades before the movie came out. And the movie changed the book a little bit, as movies will. They'll kind of embellish upon certain parts of a book or leave other parts out. But if I remember the movie right, it was controversial mainly because it followed the book faithfully in presenting a Jesus who was just as human as we are, who was tempted in every way that we are, but never succumbed to sin. Unlike us, he never actually sinned. But it kind of pressed the idea of how far Jesus was tempted. It showed him in situations and having desires that were very much like the kinds of desires and temptations that we have. And that caused quite a stir. Even the mainline press, for weeks, it was kind of one of the top stories in the press. But at the climax of the movie, there's a temptation Jesus experiences. It's the basis of the title of the book, The Last Temptation. A temptation Jesus experienced that is unique to him as the Son of God. Only the Son of God could experience a temptation like this. And the movie depicts Jesus, following pretty faithfully the book, it depicts Jesus on the cross. And while Jesus is on the cross, dying on the cross, the devil comes to him one last time, hence the last temptation of Christ. Comes to him one last time. So the devil has come to him in the desert, before his public ministry, those three temptations in the desert. He has come to him, and Jesus has kind of had a cosmic struggle with the devil throughout his public ministry and the exorcisms and so forth and other temptations. He's been there at the agony of the garden trying to tempt Jesus not to go to the cross, but now here Jesus is on the cross, dying on the cross, and the devil comes one last time. By the way, none of this is in the Bible, this last temptation. This is all in the imagination of Nikos Kazantzakis. It's all fiction. But what he imagines is that the devil comes to Jesus while he's dying on the cross, and he says, see those people down there? See those people jeering you right now? They're saying, if you're really the Son of God, come down off that cross. I'll enable you to do that. If you want, I will make it so that you can come down off this cross and you will show them up. You will show them that you're the Son of God. And they will adore you. They will worship you as rightfully should be so, because you are the Son of God. They will worship and adore you. And you will accomplish your mission. You will save the world. You'll establish the kingdom of God. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to also give you everything else your heart has ever desired. I'm going to give you that wife that you've always wanted and the children you've always wanted. And I'm going to let you live a long and healthy and happy life. And lo and behold, in the book, in the movie, Jesus gives in to that temptation. He comes down off that cross. And the people are amazed. They're stunned. They worship and adore him. And his mission works out fabulously. It's fabulously successful. And he gets married. I believe it's to Mary Magdalene. I may be wrong about that, but he gets married. And he has kids, and then he has grandkids, and he lives this long and healthy and happy life. And he has his apostles, all his friends, Peter and the gang, James and John. He has all of them around him. And the mission couldn't be going better. And everything in his life that he's ever wanted, he gets. At the very end of his life, though, as he's nearing death, things start to fall apart. And people start to turn on him and call him a traitor, a deceiver. And I believe in the movie, he's on his deathbed, actually, surrounded by his family and his friends, who now have kind of become disillusioned with him. But he's surrounded by all these people that he's had in his life, that he wanted to live this long, happy, healthy life with. And while he's on his deathbed, as he's kind of losing consciousness, the devil comes to him one last time, and he tells him, these aren't the literal words, but in effect, he basically says, "Gotcha. I got you. You fell for my last and greatest temptation." And in that moment, when the devil says, "Gotcha," the movie pans right back to the cross. All of a sudden, you see Jesus in all his agony on the cross, and he lets out his last cry, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And he gives up his final breath and dies on the cross. So even in the book, in the movie, Jesus doesn't give in to that last temptation. He ends up dying on the cross. But the movie is provocative, not just impressing the idea that Jesus was tempted like we are, but impressing the question, what if Jesus never did die on the cross? What if he came down off that cross like Kazantzakis imagined? What then? What would happen to us? Could we still be saved? Could our sins still be forgiven? That's a question that somebody submitted. They submitted a number of other questions that I'm going to try to deal with this weekend and next week's blog, but the big question they were asking is, what if Jesus never died on the cross? Could we be saved? What if Jesus never died that atoning death for us? What would happen to us? Well, the simple answer, the short answer to that question is, if Jesus didn't die an atoning death on the cross, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't exist. Human beings wouldn't be possible. See, before God ever created anything, he knew he would have to die on the cross if he was to make human beings. In other words, free creatures capable of sinning, capable of doing incredible damage and harm to one another. If he was going to create human beings who he then would love dearly as his own beloved, dear, precious children, if he was going to love these creatures who are capable of sinning and hurting one another in all kinds of vicious and horrific ways, he knew he would have to become vulnerable to that suffering and pain. And the cross, as I've said in previous blogs, is the only way a transcendent God, an infinite God, can actually do that, can actually become vulnerable to our suffering and pain, can actually suffer with us. But that's the only way he could have free creatures like us, who he at the same time would love with all his heart. The other day I was in a coffee shop. I do a lot of my work in coffee shops, and I was sitting in a coffee shop doing some of my work, when at the table, 2 tables over, they were socially distanced, but 2 tables over, there were 2 girls, teenage girls, who were talking. And one of the girls, in a very loud voice, I couldn't help overhearing because she was speaking so loud, in a very loud voice was telling the other girl about the experience she had at her previous school. I don't know if it was another high school or middle school that she was at, but in her previous school, she was bullied by a group of girls, a group of mean girls, who were really terrible, vicious to her. I couldn't help overhearing some of the things that she was describing, and then how badly it hurt her, how she felt about it. And just listening to her describe that experience, it was heartbreaking. I didn't know her from Adam. She was just some stranger sitting at a table, a few tables over at a coffee shop. But it was heartbreaking listening to what she went through. And then I thought, as I was getting upset at hearing all these things, I thought for a second about her parents, and how heartbreaking it had to be, how agonizing it had to be for them watching their daughter go through this, watching their daughter being bullied by these other kids. Now, obviously, because her parents loved her, they would agonize over her pain, her suffering, more than even she would. And the only option they would have to prevent her from experiencing that pain is to kind of like lock her up in her room, never let her go outside of the house, which really wouldn't be a good answer to that. It wouldn't allow her to thrive as a human being, to really grow and mature, and to have many other wonderful experiences out there in the real world. And the only other option, which really isn't an option at all either, is that she could kind of annihilate those girls. The parents could annihilate the other girls, the mean girls that were doing this to their daughter. If they could kind of had the foresight to know that they would be bullying her, they could kind of just like prevent them from existing somehow, which again, not possible. But from God's perspective, that analogy kind of is how it all works. From the beginning of creation, God knew that if he was going to love us when we were sinned against, he would have to agonize. It would be excruciating to him to watch us be bullied, be treated in vicious, terrible, all kinds of mean, horrible ways. It would cost him to have to suffer with us, and the cross is the only way he could do that. So if he was going to create us as human beings, as free creatures capable of loving him in return, he knew from all creation, from the beginning of the world, before the world began, from all eternity, he knew that he would have to die on the cross. It was the only way to make it possible for us to exist. So from God's side of things, what I've been talking about here is called the objective atonement. That's the technical term. From God's side of things, the only way we could exist is if he was willing to die on the cross. Without the cross, we wouldn't exist. Human beings couldn't exist. This person also asked, as a kind of follow-up on this question, about people who died before Jesus came and died on the cross, like lived before Jesus died on the cross, never heard of him, or people who throughout the world over the past 2,000 years have never heard the gospel, so they don't know that Jesus died on the cross for them. Does the cross affect them as well? And based on everything I've just said, you could probably guess that the answer is yes, of course it does, because the only reason every human being who's ever lived benefits from the cross, benefits infinitely from the cross, because we wouldn't exist without it. We couldn't exist if God wasn't willing to die on the cross for us. That's the objective atonement, what the cross does from God's side of things. It enables him to create a free creation capable of causing sin, doing great damage and harm to one another, and at the same time be able to love us, to love us with all his heart. It requires that he agonize with us, and the infinite transcendent God can only do that by becoming vulnerable to sin, by taking on human flesh, sin and suffering, by taking on human flesh and suffering and dying that way on the cross. That's the objective atonement. Next week, I'll deal with this person's questions about the subjective atonement, which is, how does that affect us? Like, do we have to somehow turn to the cross, have the cross somehow factor into our forgiveness in order to be forgiven for God? Why can't we just go to God and ask forgiveness without the cross, without any need for putting our faith or trust in Jesus and what he's done there? Next week, I'll deal with that question, what's known as the subjective atonement. So what do you think about the cross? Does it make sense to you why Jesus had to die from God's side of things on the cross? Or is it something that to you just seems to be completely out there, like totally irrelevant, having nothing to do with reality and the way that a loving God should approach us? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. And I'd love to hear any other questions that you have about any other subject. You can go to the Contact EJ page or the Raising Jesus website and leave them there. I look forward to hearing from you.